So we're learning the Maamar here. L'chol Malibi. By the way, the previous Rebbe said this Maamar not only in America in 1940, like I told you yesterday, the history of the Maamar, some of the history, but he said it, I believe, in 1936 as well. Let me explain something to you that's important for your study of Chassidus. The previous Rebbe wasn't healthy. His health, began deteriorating already in the 1930s. We don't know exactly what it was for sure. I mean, there are different opinions, but at times his speech was sluggish. At times his walking was difficult, and then there were times when his speech was excellent and he walked fine. I interviewed someone who went with a chaver, with a friend, in 1936 in Vienna to hear the Rebbe say a Maamar Chassidus. He later became a Lubavitcher. The family name is Fegelstock. You might have come across them in your travels. So he told me, I asked him, when you heard the Maamar from the Rebbe, was his clear speech? He said, as clear as it could be, and it was loud, and you could hear him. Now, I'm sure there weren't 500 people in the room. It was a smaller crowd, but regardless, so that's 1936, and we know by 1936 he already had issues somewhat with his speech. So it looks like whatever the issue was, there were better and worse times, like by all of us with our health, In the 40s, when the Rebbe came to America, he was already pretty much wheelchair bound. If you compare the two videos, him getting off the boat in 1929 and 1940, it's two different people. In 1929, you see someone who's royal and of course younger, but robust, walking like with head up, not head up, but with power, and you see a man who seems very healthy. And remember, that's just 2 years after he was in his imprisonment in 27, where they beat him. Don't ask. And I think he says himself in his writings that was when they threw him down the steps in Moscow, in that prison, which is cast iron steps. I mean, I try not to allow my mind to go there much, because it's very painful to think of that. But that's what he writes. And nevertheless, in 29, when he comes to America, he's like a spring chicken, at least outwardly. Now take a look at him in the video in 1940. You see that he's, he has illness in him. He's in a wheelchair. They have to help him get up, etc. Then later in 1945, he had a stroke, an additional stroke, and his speech was very slurred, and and all that. So what did he do in the 40s when he came to America and his health was compromised? Besides several years, I think this 1941 year and 42 and maybe 45 a little bit, he had the Rebbe and others who helped the Rebbe to prepare Maamarim that he said in Russia in the 20s and 30s. He said, take that Maamar, and I will add a beginning and an end to it, because his writing was fine. It was only his speech, and that wasn't great. But his writing was fine, which is also amazing. But again, depending on what the illness was, it impacted different parts of the body. I guess it didn't impact his writing, or at least not as bad. It looks like we have his handwriting till the end, and it looks pretty good, for handwriting. So he had the Rebbe, he told the Rebbe which Maamar he should choose. I said a Maamar in 1922 in Moscow, or in Leningrad, or here, or there, on this Shabbos, or this weekday, this Yutes Kislev, whatever. Take that Maamar, and I will prepare it, and I will add a beginning and an end. And that's what he did. And then that Maamar was published for that particular day in the 1940s. Now this Maamar of the Chol Malibi, the Rebbe actually said, like I told you, it was Monday night, September 30th, 1940. He actually said it. There were people there. But what I'm sharing with you is that this Maamar exists by all of the Rabbeim. In other words, the concepts here are not new to the Frierdiker Rebbe. The way he puts it together is his composition, okay? But even that, I think it's really a Maamar of 1936. Any questions? Okay? It's not at all to minimize the legitimacy and holiness of the Maamar of the 1940s, but it's important to know the composition and how it was done and when it was done. For example, remember I told you, Moshe, Basi Legani, right? Everyone learns Basi Legani for Yud Shvat, right? I've come to my garden. Avram, you're familiar with the Basi Legani, right? So we say that Maamar was chosen by the previous Rebbe for Yud Shvat. Yud Shvat was the yahrzeit officially of his grandmother. And it happens to be that same year, 1950, January 1950, the previous Rebbe passes away. So that became the Maamar to learn every yahrzeit of Yud Shvat, and our Rebbe would say a whole Maamar on one chapter of the 20 chapters in the Maamar that the previous Rebbe had chosen for 1950, for 4 different occasions. Take Yud Shvat, Yud Gimel Shvat, Purim, and Beis Nissen. The previous Rebbe had asked the Rebbe to put together 4 discourses that he said earlier in the 20s, and he then put a date of 1950 on each one. So he wanted one Maamar to be for his grandmother's yahrzeit. He wanted one Maamar to be for his mother's yahrzeit. He wanted one Maamar to be for Purim, and he wanted one Maamar to be for his father's yahrzeit, Beis Nissen. And guess what happens? He's not around for any of the dates because he passes away January 1950, Yud Shvat. But meanwhile, we had 4 Maamarim that he wanted us to learn for these 4 dates. So he never said those Maamarim then. When did he say them? He said them in 1923. At least the first one, Basi Legani, which has 2. 1923, Parshas Bo. On Parshas Bo, he said a Maamar on a pasuk in Parshas Bo, Be'etzem hayoyim hazeh, which is from Parshas Bo. And if you open up the book, because we have the book of Maamarim, it's identical to Basi Legani. At least it looks identical. Because that Maamar was said originally in 1923. You understand? What did he change? He changed the opening line. Instead of Basi Legani, he suggested, instead of Be'etzem hayoyim hazeh, he suggested Basi Legani. Now you'll ask, why? That I don't know. We don't know, and unless our Rebbe said that this is the reason, it remains a mystery. I mean, we could surmise and come up with suggestions and ideas. In other words, why would you Yud Shvat learn a Maamar from Parshas Bo? Yud Shvat is before Parshas Bo. and instead he inserts the opening title of Basiligani. And simply speaking, the reason is because this was the end of his life, and the Rebbe was making a summation of what life's about, and the verse in Shir Hashirim of Basiligani Achei Kala, I come to my garden, is kind of, hey, this is what life's about. Now, the Rebbe might have said what I just said, because I don't recall, but it makes sense. But the Rebbe never said so. And so too, the second opening verse, Hayoshev is Beganim, for the second Maamar in the continuum of the 20 chapters, is Hayoshev is Beganim, and then I forget the next two openings for the Maamarim. But anyway, that's I'm just showing you that this style was a style used by the previous Rebbe. My recollection is that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbes did not do that. As far as I know, they didn't do it. The Rebbe Rashab said all his Maamarim, or wrote his own Maamarim, and they were kind of fresh. You understand? They weren't what some would say old material, reshaped or reproduced. But chas v'sholem, God forbid to say that a Maamar from the past is old, because first of all, people don't know it. Second of all, people who learned it forgot. And third of all, when a Rebbe, a tzaddik, says Chassidus, and this is important for us to know, it means that Chassidus is called Isser Divrei Elokim Chayim, Dach, Daled, Aleph, Dittos, Ches, Divrei Elokim Chayim, the words of the living God. That's another name, another word for Hasidus Yoni in the world of Chabad. You might hear someone say, did you learn any Dach? I mean, today's generation, doesn't use such language. But when I was growing up, this was still part of the culture, because there were so many Hasidim from Russia, right? Or from Eretz Yisrael, from Russia came to Eretz Yisrael, and they would say Dach. And Dach had a very, very significant importance. What is that? That it's not just a good essay, and it's not just a mystical writing. It's Divrei Elokim Chayim. It's words of the living God that's been inserted in the throat and in the mouth of the Rebbe, the Tzaddik, and he expresses it. Now again, I'm not saying all Hasidim believe this, and I'm not going to go into it. But that's Chabad. That's Chabad's belief. So therefore, I could tell you, growing up and listening to the Rebbe say a Maamar, the feeling was, and still is when I learn a Maamar, that whatever is relevant now in the world, and to me, and to my family and community and everything else, filters itself through the living Divrei Elokim Chayim that's relevant now that I'm learning. Surely this was the belief when the Rebbe actually said the Maamar in 1983, and 85, and 57, and 63, makes no difference. And that's the way we were raised by our teachers and mashpiyim, that in the Maamar Hasidus, and that's why you all know probably, and if not, it's good to know, that in 1951, the Rebbe wasn't saying Maamarim. He was Farbrengen and saying Sichas, talks, explaining ideas in Torah, Gevaldik. So an old Chassid, Reb Sender Nemtsov, one second, yes, sir. Reb Sender Nemtsov, from Manchester, I believe, originally from Russia, he was the father-in-law of Rabbi Nissim Mendel, who was the Rebbe's secretary, translated many works, and took dictation for the Rebbe's letters. So at the Farbrengen of Yud Shvat, the first yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe, he got up and he said to everybody, he said to the Rebbe in front of everybody, about 200 people in the room or so, and he said, the Sicha, he said it in Yiddish, but in English, he said, the Sichas, the talks are excellent, great, but Hasidim want to hear a Maamar. Why? Why did he say that? And that was pretty brave of him, in front of everybody. Because he, who I believe was born in 1870, according to my calculations, was around old Lubavitch Chassidim and Rebbes and everything else, and everyone knew, what is Chabad? The Maamar Chassidus. And our Rebbe wasn't saying Maamarim. So he went and he said it to the Rebbe. He says, it's Yud Shvat, it's the first yard site. He basically was saying, it's time for you to say a Maamar. And guess what? After he sat down, the Rebbe started to say the Maamar Basiligani. And that was the official moment when the Rebbe accepted the leadership of Lubavitch as the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe. That moment. What made it? The Maamar. So in other words, the Maamar in Chabad has the significance, a very different significance. So therefore, why am I saying this? Even if the previous Rebbe took an old Maamar from the 1920s and he had it reprinted with a new heading and end in the 1940s, it's the exact Hasidus Divrei Elokim Chaim that was necessary in 1940 so and so on this and this day and this parsha. Isser, it's your turn.
I'm still unclear on the difference between a Sicha and a Maamar. Was one formally written down? Was one spontaneous? What distinguishes the Sicha from the Maamar?
Okay, good question. By our Rebbe, he prepared everything. He prepared his Sichas that he was going to talk. He once said, I spent 8 hours, Shabbos day, when he was explaining a Rashi, he somehow came out. He never spoke this way. He spent the last night 7-8 hours preparing one Rashi talk. You imagine? I can't imagine. 7-8 hours to explain properly one Rashi on the Parsha. So the Rebbe prepared, and he also prepared which Maamar is going to say. That means he learned it, and then he decided how to explain it, and then the belief is that God goes through the mouth of the tzaddik, and the way it comes out is sometimes not even the way he prepared it. That's the uniqueness of a Maamar. A Sicha means conversation. So you have to, it's a good question you're asking, but you have to think of it this way. Sicha is kind of the mundane conversation by a Rebbe, and a Maamar is the holy conversation by a Rebbe. Although there is no mundane conversation by a tzaddik. But nevertheless, if you compare the Sicha to the Maamar, the Sicha is conversational. So in other words, let's say what I'm talking to you now about, this is it's a Sicha, it's not a Sicha, it's a talk, right? It's a talk. Some call it a Farbrengen, some call it a talk. But when we learn the text here, and we learn about the two types of Riyah, of course it comes out in speech. But you hear clearly we're talking about godly concepts. Atzilus, Bria, Nefesh, Riyah Mukhshis, Riyah Sichlis. That's not Sicha. So in English we say, you're speaking with your mouth. Thank you. I know I'm speaking with my mouth. But what's the teichen? What's the content of what I'm speaking about? It's elikus. And in a Chabad we call that Maamar. Any clear or not? Yes, sir?
Let me try and rephrase it and tell me if I'm off base or if I'm on target.
Please.
So a Sicha is the Rebbe expounding on an idea, on a concept, on a topic, but a Maamar is a more direct teaching of Chassidus.
Yes. And Chassidus, any Chassidus, as you know, is its content. Chassidus, I say it again, is a study of divinity. Chassidus is not Mesilas Yesharim. Chassidus is not Pirkei Avos. It's a bad mistake. And people make the mistake because we're looking for self-improvement. I mean, I'm just finishing my book on Tanya on mental health issues, right? So I am using the Tanya as a guide for mental health. But I write in my introduction, that's not pure Chassidus. That's really mental health issues and how we can find suggestions that the Alter Rebbe makes in Tanya for those issues. But pure Tanya, pure Chassidus, is like you said, Chassidus. What's Chassidus? Chassidus is godliness. Yoni, part of godliness is to be mentally stable and not to be impatient and not to get angry. But that's not, you don't need Chassidus for that. Learn Mesilas Yesharim, learn Musar, learn Pirkei Avos, learn Hilchos Deos and the Rambam, and you'll be a fine mensch. Chassidus is about God and making you godly. It's a whole different equation. So that's why Moshe shared a story, and I asked permission to share it, and I just want to, it just comes up sometimes, so I'll share it now. He said he was at a Kiddush in Eish Kodesh last Shabbos with a very good friend whose father or father-in-law came in from another part of the country, from Yerushalayim, and he went over to Moshe. Moshe was giving out l'chaims to people to get the crowd, So he says, "Are you a Lubavitcher?" He asks him. Really, Moshe, you can share the story yourself. I don't have to repeat the story. But anyway, maybe it's more comfortable. So he says, "Are you a Lubavitcher?" So he didn't answer right away. So, well, I'm a Lubavitcher. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, if you think I'm a Lubavitcher, I'm a Lubavitcher. And he says to him, I don't know if again the beginning again. I'm not gonna be doing you just, Moshe, and repeating it exactly the way you told it to me. But from what I remember now, he said, he was about tshuva growing up in the United States, and he was close to a Chabad Rav, and he says, I can tell from the way you give me out the aliyahs or the way he did his gabbai there and all that. He said I could tell that you're a Lubavitcher, a Chabadnik. And so Moshe called me and said that I spoke yesterday about how a Torah that a person learns makes an impact on the person, that the person is displayed through their Torah, and the same was Chassidus. Chassidus of being divine. When you're in that mode, you conduct yourself in more of a divine way. So automatically, being more divine, you don't want to be angry. And you want to be more charitable. It's all true. But that's a result of the Chassidus, not the mainstay of Chassidus. In other words, come, let's learn Chassidus, because when we learn Chassidus, you'll have more patience. That's not Chassidus. No. You'll be more godly. If you'll be more godly, you'll be more patient, you'll be less angry, you'll be more charitable. So, in summation, Isser, what you said is correct. The way you discerned between a Sicha and a Maamar is correct. Also, Isser, just for your knowledge, you probably heard this tapes, or maybe you were by Farbrengens, I don't know. But when the Rebbe said a Sicha, he spoke in a conversation style. Like, he had his sing-song, like Rabbi Soloveitchik had his sing-song, and I'm sure your Rebbe has his sing-song. People have I have my sing-song. We all have our sing-song as we speak. But when he said a Maamar, the sing-song changed. And it was a different tone and a different... So, for example, the Rebbe would say, Bo siligani achoisi kalo, ise b'medrish tilim, lagani ksiv kan el lagani. That's not, ise b'medrish tilim is not the quote over there, but I'm just saying that sing-song. That sing-song you didn't find during a Sicha, during a talk. Yes, Moshe.
Would you say that on the Maamar it's on a higher level?
Okay, so B'chitzonius, outwardly, the answer is yes. B'pnimius, no. And that I learned from my mashpir Reb Yoel Kahn. He taught us that the Rebbe's greatness was to bring the deepest ideas of God through the Sicha, because the conversation and Sicha is for the average man. Whereas the Maamar, like Isser said before, it's Chassidus, you have to be plugged in. So someone that's not plugged in, doesn't even know the terminology, doesn't understand, it's like right? Atzilus, Bria, like, when you learn, and we've been learning 5 years, and we're learning, and we're talking, you become a little more comfortable, A, with the terms, B, with the ideas, and the culture, But so outwardly, Moshe, the Maamar had, in the way it was said, the content of what was said, the purpose of it, had the makings of it being more holy, to answer your question. But Rabbi Yoel taught us that the Rebbe kind of disguised the essence of Hashem and his teachings and everything through conversation. And Rabbi Yoel said this was our chidush by this Lubavitcher Rebbe, the 7th one, that we didn't see by any of the 6 previous ones. And that's true. That I can support historically. Because until the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe, we don't find any, Farbrengens for hours where they spoke extensively. The Rebbe Rashab introduced, it seems to me that the one Farbrengen a year, there were 2 Farbrengens a year that Lubavitch Chassidim had. Yutes Kislev and Yud Kislev. Yutes Kislev was the Geula of the Balatanya, and Yud Kislev is the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe, the 2nd Rebbe. Right? Because they both were in jail and all that, and what that represents. And then you go through the rest of the Rabbeim, and although they were in jail and all that, but there was no holiday made out of their Geula. So it seems to me that was really the celebration, and if you compare Yud to Yutes, there's no comparison. So for example, in 1924, Mr. Kramer, who came from Russia around the turn of the century, he writes, and I have it, and I put it into one of the books. He writes, we're going to make a Siyam Hashas, and he says, Dafka by us Chassidim. He says, Dafka by us Lubavitch Chassidim, we learn Gemara. That's what he says. He means compared to some of the other Chassidic groups at the time, or from his knowledge in Russia, they didn't really put an emphasis on Gemara. We're going to finish Shas, Yutes Kislev. He wants everyone from the greater New York area to come to the Siyum. When? Yutes Kislev. Fischl Schneerson, the psychiatrist, writes about how Yutes Kislev was in Saratov, Ukraine, I think, in the late 1880s. Fascinating. It's in Hebrew, you should read it. Sanguria Shel Rebbe, I think is the name of the Sefer. He gives a description there of Yutes Kislev that's fascinating. So Yutes Kislev was really the day that was celebrated by Lubavitch Chassidim. The Rashab starts Farbrengen 2 other days, Purim and Simchas Torah. Okay, 3 days a year we're Farbrengen. That's it. The rest of the time we're learning, working. Comes the previous Rebbe, and he starts Farbrengen more often. First of all, he now has a new Yom HaGeula, Yud Beis Tammuz, where his life was spared, and he was redeemed. So that now falls into the category of Yutes and Yud Kislev, redemption from jail. So now 100 years after his ancestors' Yom HaGeula, we have a new Yom HaGeula. And frankly, when the Litvish Misnagdim complained to Reb Chaim Oizer, what's this business of New Yom HaGeula? You know what Reb Chaim Oizer said, by Zei kommt zu, and by uns wird weniger. By them, they add another holiday, and by us, it gets less and less, referring to the fallout from Haskalah, etc. And when they came to Reb Chaim Brisker, and they also had a Taina on Lubavitch, with Yud Beis Tammuz, he said, you should celebrate it. You should definitely celebrate it. And the question was when to celebrate it, because it was the year after he said you should celebrate it, and he made a point of it. Yes, yes, sir.
So at the same time, it sounds like the Farbrengen is a less formal.
Right. The Farbrengen is definitely less formal. I once asked my father-in-law, he was from Russia, from Kharkov, from Ukraine. I asked him, what did you guys do? He says, as you know, until we had to go to work, we just went to shul. I said, what did you do in shul? We danced, we ate arbus, we ate kasha, we said l'chaim, and we danced, and we were happy for the day. That's it. You know, I was expecting him to say, you know, we Farbrengen, and said Maamarim, and I'm sure they said a Maamar, you know, but you know what I'm saying? He pointed out to me that it was a celebratory, happy day of just being together. So there's no question that the Farbrengen was more informal. Frankly, the one who kind of formalized Farbrengens was our Rebbe. In the early years, 51, 52, those years, during our Rebbe's Farbrengens, older Chassidim would comment, would speak sometimes, not interrupting his words, but in between, and the younger guys got upset, and they basically said, no, this is not Derech Eretz. Here is a tzaddik, a Rebbe speaking, so during the intervals you say l'chaim, and you follow his lead, not you show him the lead. And it took some work, and they basically accomplished. It was the Maamarim and the yeshiva who kind of solidified this style. But this style was not a style that was known by Chassidim. Look into the Rebbe Rashab's Farbrengens in a sefer called Torah Sholem. You'll see there's comments. He said this one said this. Now naturally people who spoke were Chassidim and thoughtful people, you know what I'm saying, elders and all that. But nevertheless, you see they asked a question, he gives an answer. In our Rebbe's Farbrengen, no one asked questions. Not during the Farbrengen. I mean, you would be taken out. But that took some time. But overall, yes, a Farbrengen by Chassidim for sure is more informal. And by the Rabbeim, it was more informal compared to a Maamar. Again, a Sicha was not said until... The previous Rebbe, we're going on here, I have to go learn. The previous Rebbe said Sichas, but different style. It was stories and history. Our Rebbe, the Sichas consisted of Torah, insights into Torah, mostly. So there's a difference in the Sichas. Chevra, I have another shiur, I forgot about it, so we'll catch up tomorrow, okay? A nice Farbrengen today. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.